Good afternoon and welcome back to Stream 3. Today our speakers will be addressing a very interesting topic, the title of which is Intergovernmental Relations in the Context of Government Digitalization Initiatives. But before I introduce our speakers and give a brief overview of their topic, I'd like to remind you that the session will last 50 minutes. We'll hear from our speakers for about 40 minutes or so, and then will be a 10-minute period of time for Q&A. For the purposes of the Q&A, you'll be able to vote on which questions you would like asked, and everything will be recorded and you will be sent a link at a later date. These sessions will be available in the CVent for 90 days, then on the Digital Transformation YouTube channel. So as I mentioned, our session today is entitled Intergovernmental Relations in the Context of Governmental Digitization Initiatives. We're fortunate to have two speakers, Dr. Eric Champagne, a PhD as an associate professor in public administration at the School of Political Studies and director of the Center on Governance at the University of Ottawa. He is teaching courses in theory and practice of public management and governance, program evaluation, research methods, and public policy development. Dr. Champagne will be joined by Sylvain Gomes, a PhD candidate in public administration at the University of Ottawa. She is affiliated with the Center on Governance at the University of Ottawa and the Institute for Applied Economic Research in Brazil. She holds a master's degree in political science and a Bachelor of Laws from Fluminense Federal University. Without further ado, I'd like to turn things over to our two speakers.
Hey, thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I need to mention that I am currently in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast in Africa, for a project that I'm working on here. And I hope that the internet connection will hold. So far, so good. So the main topic of this conference is obviously digital transformation in government. And today, Silvana and I, we would like to talk to you about intergovernmental relations within the context of digital government initiatives, as Steve mentioned, which I really think that it's a crucial but also very complex subject in the context of a federal country like ours, like Canada. So without further ado, let's jump right into that topic, and Silvana will share the presentation. And so you have the title here. Maybe next slide, Silvana. So for the agenda today, we're gonna just explore a little bit the context of this research. We're gonna explore key concepts. Obviously, we're academics, so we like concepts and theories. And then we're gonna try to be more practical and establish some links and ambiguities between intergovernmental relations and digitalization. Silvana will also address pressing issues, best practices, and a few key takeaways. Silvana? So for the context, I just want to mention that we work on a research project, Silvana and I include also André Lecour, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Ottawa. We work with the Forum of Federations, and we published recently a scoping note on the digitalization of public administration in federal countries, obviously. And we really try to explore the division of power and the responsibilities between the different levels of governments, including obviously the federal government, central government, the provinces or regions in some other countries, and municipal entities, which are also very important. And we realize that definition of roles and responsibilities and coordination and cooperation are very important in the implementation of these kinds of initiatives or projects or policy. Silvana? So our research questions and our research objectives are as followed. The question is federalism an obstacle or a driver of digitalization. Does digitalization lead to centralization? It was one of our concerns. And what are the strategies that are being adopted to tackle the challenges of implementing digital policies in these multi-level systems? And our objectives, we want to study the design and implementation of these digital initiatives in the multi-level systems. And we study basically case studies. And we have a book coming, which will look at Australia, Austria, Brazil, Canada, Germany, India, Switzerland, and the United States. And it's a book in preparation, should be published in 2023-24, hopefully. Next slide. So some of the key concepts we use in that research starts with obviously the central topic of this presentation, the intergovernmental relations. What do we mean by that? Obviously, it's when you have different levels of government to cooperate, or they have to, or they should cooperate for implementing or designing sometimes policies. And it's a very dynamic kind of phenomenon where, you know, actors that are elected and they fight sometimes for their own, you know, power and responsibilities. And it's the case in Canada very often, especially in areas where there's not a long history of negotiation between the different levels of government, and a field, digitalization, which is evolving really quickly. So it requires lots of negotiation, cooperation, collaboration. Silvana? Multi-level governance, we love to talk about this concept because when we talk about intergovernmental relations, sometimes we forget either the local governments, sometimes we forget other actors that are involved, especially the private sector in that field. So, and the industry and the non-profit organization as well. So there's a lot of actors at different levels. And this is really to tackle that kind of complexity that we like to, sometimes we will refer to multi-level settings, multi-level governance. This is a concept that is very important for the Center on Governance and for some of my research as well. Silvana? So central to governance in general and multi-level governance in particular, collaboration and coordinations are key concepts. So collaboration refers to a process in which organizations exchange information, alter activities, share resources, and enhance each other's capacity for mutual benefit and a common purpose. Conditions, so what we study very often in political science and public administration are the conditions for collaboration. What are the conditions for these collaboration to happen? So what are the mutual gains, the win-win situation? What are the interdependence? Sometimes they cannot escape, you know, some kind of structural powers like the constitutions, for just to mention that factor. Some institutional incentives, financial transfer to stimulate some behavior, or some partnerships with different levels of government, values, ideas, interests. Those are the kind of things we study. And then we have the coordination, of course, which occurs when decisions made in one program or organization consider those made in others and attempt to avoid conflict. So those are the key concepts that we elaborate on in our research project. Silvana? And obviously digitalization. So it's the leveraging of digitalization to effect limited change to local business processes. And for government, it means a comprehensive process through which ICT are employed to improve how governments run and deliver public services. And obviously it affects right now all government. There's lots going on in the digitalization of government, either in service delivery, delivering goods, and also all the legal and the legislations around digitalization, which is so important to enable the private sector initiatives. So there's lots of a big role to play for the government in this area. Savannah? So there's what we study actually is the linkages between intergovernmental relations and digitalization. And this relationship is very important. The government play such an important role in the success or failure of initiatives involving several governments. And very often we are at the crossroad of many governments when it comes to make decisions in this area. And sometimes they need to coordinate, and we'll give in a few minutes a lot of example of how it works. How do intergovernmental relations affect digitalization is another key question. So good intergovernmental relations can streamline the design and the implementation of digital policies. And our research suggests, and some of the academic literature suggests, that intergovernmental collaboration yields to better outcomes in the face of complex public policy system, and especially the case of digitalization. And another question is, how does digitalization affect intergovernmental relations? So it's a common challenge across government, and it can spur either competition and conflict or partnerships and collaboration. So we try to study both occurrences and try to analyze that from a public administration perspective. Savannah? So if you think about one field that is crucial to have coordination, is certainly right now, it's cybersecurity. Obviously, it can affect different levels of government. Right now, there's a lot going on. We are under threats, especially when there's a war going on in between the, involving Russia, obviously. So this is a very important initiative, I think, and it exists for a certain time now, and it's the Canadian Centre for Cyber Securities. That is really our Canadian authority for cyber security, and it has lots of coordination. First of all, it brings a coordination between the different departments in the federal government. If you think about public safety, Shared Service Canada, many police forces. And so there's a coordination that has to be done horizontally, within the federal government itself. And then it needs to be really well coordinated with the industry, with private organizations, and because we rely so much on systems that are managed and driven by the private sector. So Canada has to think about how they can play a role in protecting critical infrastructure, of course, public ones, but also the ones that are managed by the industry. And then they need to coordinate with other levels of government. There's always in security and public safety issues. This is not only, when something happens, it doesn't affect only the federal government, it does affect the provinces, the municipalities. So within the government and with external partners, cybersecurity is such an important issue in terms of coordination and cooperation between different actors. Next slide, Silvana, thank you. And in the field of digitalization, there's so many emerging issues. It's such a dynamic field, and this is the nature by nature. The digitalization of government is a transformations, and it involves so many novel issues. So we need to keep that in perspective. And here we present the strategy, the Canadian strategy on artificial intelligence, because it does involve not only governments, but also universities, learning or research organizations, and most of the time it's managed by the university education is managed by provinces and it involves also some regions. If you think about clusters of technology development, so it does have a perspective of or an issue of coordination. So this initiative essentially is an incentive. It provides millions of dollars, 125 millions to be more precise, and to release a national AI strategy across the country. Obviously, there are some clusters. If you think about Montreal, Toronto, and Moncton are very important center for training, for research, for innovation. So that does meet some of our criteria when we look at the importance of intergovernmental relations, multi-level governance, and collaboration and cooperation between different levels of actors and government. Silvana, next slide. Thank you. And the next slide is about service delivery and how can government work together to improve or ease and facilitate information. And this is what we call the BizPol initiative, which is an online service that is jointly managed by federal, provincial, municipal, and territorial governments. And it essentially helps the business people, entrepreneurs, to get information on what type of license and permits they need in order to operate their own business. So it's, in other words, it's a one-stop shop source of information on permits and licenses. And as you probably know, this is like lots of regulations involved in running a business. And this initiative is very important because it helps every citizen or business people to access crucial information, so they don't wait too much or have problems with either fiscal problems, either permits problems, and they can really, it's really help the business community to get this information, and it really rely on a collaboration between different levels of government. Next slide, Silvana. Thank you. And as I mentioned, we look at positive cases, but we also try to look at where there's issues of collaboration. And if you think about one, I'd say that the collaboration in the field of broadband access and broadband infrastructure and the regulations in Canada is, as you probably know, a very big issue. So we're following that. And with the emergence of the 5G technology, this issue has gained even more prominence. There's been lots of talks in the media lately on that issue, and obviously there's one of the main issue is the problem of regulations. The regulatory framework is very old. It dates from 1990s, and really there's a need for updating this regulation, especially with the emergence of the 5G. And one of the barriers of the deployment of Canada's broadband is also related to this problem of coordination between the different levels of government. There's also an issue with provinces want to jump in. They want to make broadband accessible to everyone, but it's a really big issue in terms of because it relies on such important infrastructure. So regulatory fragmentation is really costly in that respect. And so carriers, obviously, they can do better, but also there's there's a role for the public authorities to encourage, to create the right let's say conditions so the industry can make more progress and faster. And we all agree that it's so important for our economy to strive, for people to get access to this broadband everywhere in the country, and we could solve so many problems by giving a better access, covering the coverage and the speed of internet as well in terms of the future of our country. So those are some initial thought and ideas and initiatives. I wanted to link that. I hope it makes it a little bit more concrete in terms of the key concept we address. And now I'm going to turn to Silvana, so she will continue on with some more examples and concrete examples. Silvana, back to you.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to have this conversation about intergovernmental relations and their links with digitalization. So, as Eric has mentioned throughout his part of the presentation, it is a very complex relationship. And as a result of such complexity, what we can see is that it is imbued with some ambiguities that policymakers, analysts, practitioners, anyone generally interested in the subject should be aware of. So let's start with some examples of digitalization initiatives where this intergovernmental component that we are talking about is more evident. So first of all, one-stop shops and no-stop shops. So Eric has already mentioned a little bit about one-stop shops. So just to be clear here, one-stop shops, they are those centralized platforms for the delivery of digital services, and they usually consist of a single point of access to a variety of public services that are usually provided by different governments or different departments within the same level of government. On the other hand, those top shops, which are a more recent trend, they go one step further. And in this case, citizens, they do not need to take any actions or to fill out any forms to receive services from government. So there is a very famous case in Estonia where digitalization is very famous in terms of its development. And there in Estonia, when you register your child, if you're eligible for certain benefits from the government, then you are automatically enrolled to receive those benefits because, well, the government already has all the information it needs to evaluate whether you are eligible or not, and then to process such a request, or in this case, it's not even a request, but just to process the benefit so that you can receive without having to actively go there and fill out forms and to apply for the service. So these are the main ideas behind one-stop shops and no-stop shops. And for them to happen, well, it requires a lot of intergovernmental collaboration and those joint efforts to bring together all the pieces of information, all the systems, and all and everything that is required to have this sort of integrated service delivery. And interoperability frameworks are also a very important lever of digitalization. And for them to happen, we really need to have this sort of close collaboration between different government units and even levels of government, because the core idea here is to to enable this sort of compatibility so that different services or different data, from distinct government units can be brought together to provide a better experience for citizens, businesses, and other stakeholders that want to access certain public goods and services. Policy labs are also another great example of this linkage between the governmental relations and digitalization, and in great part because they usually comprise multidisciplinary government teams, and so this need to bring together different perspectives and different teams, is another example of instances of digitalization where this sort of joint action is required. So moving forward, when we talk about open data, open governments, and also data commons, here we have a very strong intergovernmental collaboration component because those initiatives, they can enable the reuse of data that we talk so much about, in those current discussions about digitalization and the promotion of digital government. So the creation of repositories comprising data sets from different public sector organizations across jurisdictions lines, this for sure requires a lot of intergovernmental collaboration and those joint action efforts. And as Erica has mentioned before, cybersecurity, AI regulations, the protection of privacy and personal information, they are emerging challenges that have very strong ethical implications, and they also require this sort of intergovernmental collaboration to provide satisfactory results that put citizens' needs at the center of service delivery. So here are just a couple of examples. Erica has already talked a little bit about BISPOL. It's a very interesting service because instead of going through multiple public authorities just to find out which documents, permits, and licenses you have to operate your business, entrepreneurs are in a much better position to streamline this process through a very intuitive, online, and above all, free service. And it's a very easy platform to navigate, so anyone should be able to access it. So it is a great example of when governments come together to offer this sort of integrated service, how it can really change people's lives and establish a better relationship with stakeholders in general. And another good example comes from Switzerland through e-operations. Well, in fact, in recent years, Switzerland has been taking impressive steps in terms of intergovernmental cooperation to deliver digital public services. And just to clarify what is e-operations and how does it work, it's actually a public company. And the main goal of this public company is to facilitate the cooperation between the Swiss Confederation, the cantons, which are the subnational governments, and also municipality in all sorts of digitalization matters. So it provides a series of shared services to different levels of government, covering a wide array of services such as project management, sharing experiences, and also promoting public bids to attract the most suitable suppliers to respond to government's needs in terms of IT goods and services. And here, through this sort of integrated approach, the expectations are, one, to reduce costs because you can gain economies of scale when you do this sort of purchases comprising different digital units, government units, pardon me, and also to streamline and speed up the adoption of technological solutions by public sector organizations. So these are two good examples that illustrate this sort of intergovernmental collaboration we are talking about. But of course, as we said, there are many ambiguities involved in this relationship between intergovernmental relations and digitalization initiatives. So on the one hand, we can identify a number of positive outcomes resulting from this sort of collaborative action. So for example, enabling those joined up projects that are founded on common interests shared by different governments. So this is important because this way governments may be in a better position to implement projects when compared to acting alone. So this can bring about very positive outcomes. And the promotion of mutual learning is also a key issue here because this kind of mutual learning allows for the fine tuning of policy processes, and also it allows for the enhancement of certain policy outcomes because through this sort of mutual learning, different governments can share their experiences and they can learn from each other and they can replicate positive experiences, and they can also avoid pitfalls that other governments have gone through. So this is very important as well. And finally, enabling experimentation and also scaling up solutions. And it is important because sometimes digitalization projects, they involve some sort of trial and error approach, and also it allows for to gain a better perspective in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and we can see that in different contexts. So this is also a very positive outcome that we can think about when dealing with this sort of intergovernmental collaboration to promote digitalization. But on the other hand, we can also identify a number of potential drawbacks. So for example, it can occur, conflicts can occur around both the strategies and the instruments to be adopted to advance those strategies. So as Eric mentioned before, there is a lot of consensus building and negotiations involved in those initiatives, and it may not always be easy to arrive at the level of consensus that is necessary to promote those common projects, and also accountability weaknesses. This is not something new. For the past decades, actually, when we talk about those networked governance arrangements involving multiple parties, a core issue is how to strengthen accountability in those arrangements where the division of roles and responsibilities can be a little bit blurred, so they are not always clear. So this is a potential drawback that we should be aware of. And finally, ensuring coherence to implement those initiatives that involve multiple governments. So given all that, what are the most impression issues to address all those ambiguities that we have been discussing? So the first 2 points, they are very interrelated. So the first one is clearly defining roles and responsibilities, and the second one involves the establishment of governance regimes that foster collaboration. And here we really put the accent on governance or on governance regimes because to a great extent, they are responsible for the success or even for the failures of this sort of joint action by different governments. And here, having this clear definition of who does what, when, and what risks are bared by each party is very important to establish a good governance framework. Of course, ensuring coherence to implement all those policies across different governments, and also providing integrated solutions to citizens, because what we see sometimes is a constellation of separate services, and it is not the best way or the most efficient way to provide those services. So provide integrated solutions, and as we are discussing here, it is anchored in this sort of intergovernmental collaboration, is key to delivering responsive services in the digital age. So moving forward, what practices are currently being adopted to promote successful intergovernmental collaboration in the realm of digitalization, given all those potential drawbacks and those ambiguities that we have been discussing? So let's go over a few examples. And I'll start here with digital government units. So here we take this definition provided by Amanda Clark, who is a professor at Culture University here in Ottawa. And she defines digital government units as dedicated in-house units of digital expertise operating at the center of government versus mainline department specific. And the interesting thing to note here is that to a great extent, digital government units emerged out of the need to address some IT failures in the public sector. So for example, fragmented, siloed procurement process, they often led to many inefficiencies. So the creation of digital government units at the center of government was considered as important as a solution to this sort of problem. And they also play a very important role in acting as a sort of reference organization for digitalization matters to which different departments and even government units can resort to when they want to consult on different digitalization issues. So that's why they're very important. And here we bring two examples. One is a government digital service from the UK. Actually, it was the British digital government unit. It was one of the very first DGUs in the world. And it was created precisely against this background of massive IT failures in the British government. And also we have the US digital service, and they do not always operate, at the federal or at the central level. So for example, here in Ontario, we have the Ontario Digital Service as well. So those digital government units, they can be created in all levels of government. Next, well, this is a very important aspect, the formalization of intergovernmental spaces for collaboration. So this is important because it allows different levels of government to work together on a continuous rather than a network or case-by-case basis. So this creates some sort of institutional memory and legacy of ways of collaborating to foster digitalization. And here there is this great example from Switzerland where they bring together all levels of government to collaborate in an institutionalized space where the core objective is to speed up digitalization. Another important approach refers to joint innovation procurement. So joint procurement is a very well-established and well-known strategy in terms of promoting economies of scale and acquiring public goods in a bundled way. But what we have here in Canada is a very interesting example involving the Municipal Innovation Exchange. And here we have a few municipalities, so the cities of Barrie, Guelph, and London, plus some stakeholders and the Mars Discovery District. And here, the key point is to enable cities to become early adopters of innovative technology. So this initiative operates also they adopt a very participatory and a co-production approach whereby governments and vendors work together to design tailored innovative solutions to pressing municipal problems. Interoperability frameworks we have mentioned before, but they are key to promoting digitalization as well. And of course, they require a lot of joint action so that different government organizations, they render their data and applications and systems compatible with one another. And this allows for better public services. This morning, I was reading a paper that has just been published and that deals with the European case. And the conclusion that the researchers arrive at is that the adoption of those interoperability frameworks, they increase the number and the quality of interaction between citizens and governments. So this is a very important aspect as well. And of course, service delivery partnerships. Here in Canada, we have a few good examples. And I'd like to bring your attention to the idea of having service bundles. So this 5-in-1 newborn registration service that is a partnership between the Canadian federal government and the Ontario provincial government allows for 5 services to be delivered altogether. Once you register that childbirth, and then just in one stop, you can have 5 services. So this is a very innovative approach, and this also responds to this idea of putting citizens' need at the forefront of service delivery. It is free, it is online, very intuitive, easy to use. So this is only possible through this sort of collaboration and partnership that we are talking about. And of course, we cannot forget international collaboration. And here we have listed a few examples. And what all of them have in common is to provide a space for different governments to come together, share their experiences, and learn from one another. And they also provide some spaces, some activities, and also some meetings where digital governmental leaders from all over the world can share their experiences and perspectives. So here are a few takeaways based on everything that we have discussed so far. Well, first of all, as you can see, there are many challenges, of course, but we have so many opportunities as well. And to harness those opportunities, it is very important that governments enhance their collaboration strategies, as well as the instruments and mechanisms to promote this sort of collaboration that we are discussing here. And for that to happen, we need to focus not only on technical issues, but also on governance. And when we talk about governance, we need to address certain issues. So for example, risk management, communication, and a clear definition of roles and responsibilities, as we have insisted through the presentation. And finally, promoting a culture of intergovernmental collaboration is key. As we know, organizational changes are complex, and we have to deal with the cultural aspects involved in it. So here are a few references for you to consult if you wish to expand on the subject. we invite you to stay in touch with us. Here we have our contact information, and we'd be more than happy to take any questions you might have. Thanks so much. And Eric, over to you. I don't know if you have any final remarks to make before we go on to the Q&A, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Silvana. I'll turn to Steve for the Q&A and the comments from the audience. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you both very much for such an interesting and enlightening presentation. I'd encourage everyone, all attendees, to post their questions, and I will in turn relay them to both Eric and Silvana. But while we're waiting for some of these questions to be posted, one thought that comes to mind is, the governments, be they provincial or federal or municipal, have the capacity, the ability to do this type of work, provide these types of services on their own? And if not, what role do you see the private sector playing in all of this?
Well, I think this is there's a huge role for the private sector, in my opinion. But the role of the government is to regulate the market and to also put in place, and regulation is not negative, it's positive. It sets the rules, and it sets the rules for the basic infrastructure to take its place, and it's always going to be an important partnership with the private sector. I don't think that, it's rarely happening that the grid and the networks and will be totally undertaken by the government. So it sets the rules, it sets the regulation, but it needs to be coherent, from coast to coast to coast, and it needs to be also factors that's going to help the market to shine. But Silvana, do you concur, or do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to jump in. I have a few comments on this regard. Well, the private sector plays a major role. Even though it has been a growing effort on the part of governments to try to increase their in-house capacity and their in-house skills in terms of dealing with the technical challenges involved in digitalization, they still rely very much on the role of vendors and of IT providers in general. But what we have seen in more recent initiatives is some sort of co-production or co-design approach in which governments and private agents, they try to collaborate with one another. So, for example, in the context of this municipal information exchange initiative that I have just mentioned here in Ontario, what they have done is to work closely with IT suppliers to enable, to fast track prototyping and scaling up solutions of products and services that the government itself could later, be a purchaser. So I think that there are many venues for collaboration between public and private players, but I would say, and here I concur with Eric, that what we need is to try to break down this patchwork of regulations and policies and norms that sometimes are not very clear. And we need to establish maybe a better regulatory framework to, at the same time, spur this sort of collaboration, but also to increase or to enhance the quality of regulation and governance in terms of data governance, for example, AI regulations, and many other emerging issues. But I see this as a very close relationship between the public and the private sector.
Thank you. This is going to be a difficult one, but has there been any attempt to develop some form of business case for this? Because there must be a huge sticker shock and cost associated with what is needed. How do you go about justifying this from a cost perspective, cost savings perspective, or is that really not feasible?
Silvana, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of joint procurement, no, it's a more salient issue in terms of the costs they justify. No, the potential benefits they justify. No, the costs involved with setting up those initiatives. But here in Canada, I don't see that discussion very much. But for example, in Switzerland, in the context of the initiatives that I have presented, the research that served as the basis for this sort of initiative was that, hey, it is more efficient. So in terms of costs and the opportunities that could be generated from this sort of initiative, it's worth it. So it's a good value for money. So we should go about and set up the regulatory frameworks and also the organizational structures that we need to provide, or to enable this sort of collaboration between different levels of government. And so, for example, the operations public company that I had just mentioned, it involved costs, it involved, establishing a new, public company, but still it was worth it because of the gains in terms of economy of scale and everything that it will promote in the long run.
Eric, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm ready to take the next question.
Okay, one last question before the end of the day. Is Canada in good position in terms of the legal admissibility of digitalized records, and I think in particular the legal admissibility, let's say, of electronic signatures? Where does Canada stand?
Silvana, do you have an opinion on that, or some research to back?
Yes, there are some recent developments. I think that we are pointed maybe in the right direction in terms of turning those sorts of for example, electronic signatures admissible for all legal purposes. I know that other countries have more advanced regulations in this regard, but the way I see it and based on what I have read recently, I think that we are heading the right direction, even though sometimes the pace of change is not exactly what we would expect it to be. But I see that there is a much more favorable environment to move forward with this sort of more modern approach, for example, to sign documents and to have them recognized as valid for all intents and purposes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think that's just about it. I'm going to thank you both very much again for such an enlightening presentation. I know personally I found this to be quite educational and useful for the type of consulting work that I'm involved with right now. So great job. Thank you so much. And a big thank you to all the people in attendance for their involvement of their questions.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.